When I think about sin, there are 1,000 different reasons and stories that play into why certain sins latch on to certain people. If I think about myself, I think the core reason that I've struggled, like if you could trace my sin back to a root, it would be this like longing I have for love and to like feel loved by a love that could love me back as like much as I loved it. I just wanted to like love and then be loved in return. Growing up, I was raised in the church, like by parents who knew God and they loved God, and they wanted me to know God and obey Him. And so I spent a great deal of my life, almost a decade, just knowing that He was there, but not really knowing who He was. Like so many young women in our church, I was raised to pursue purity through shame. Like I was shamed into pursuing a holy life because there was no concept of God's love for me put into the rules that were laid before me. Like boundary lines were set for me, but to maintain an image or how I looked to a community. It had nothing to do with God's affection for me. So like I knew that God loved the world, so He sent His Son, but I didn't know that God loved me, and so that meant that He wanted to protect my body and my heart and my mind and keep me safe from things. So all of God's rules were just commandments to make me look good to everybody else and not to like actually keep me safe. But because of that, I went out to go find affection because I didn't know I could find it in God's presence. I needed to go find it somewhere else. And so what ended up happening was I would cross those boundary lines in secret so that I could have that affection. And so that turns me into a friend that manipulated the people around me into needing me because I felt like I needed to be needed, to be loved. And then I just ended up disappointed. That also led me to stay in an incredibly abusive relationship for years because I had crossed so many lines in that place that I was convinced. I was like, oh, this is what affection looks like. 2, no one else could ever love me now because of how broken I'd become in all of that. And I found ways to make myself happy down there on my knees. Like I found ways to cope with everything that I'd done, and as long as I presented a proper front that looked right, so then it wouldn't matter. So I think like years into living like this, it's like I was still deeply, deeply longing for love. And the first time I received the gospel, it was through Hosea. And so every time I think about this now, this is very much Gomer being like led out into the wilderness and God speaking tenderly to her, and I embodied that completely during this time, and so gently He was teaching me about Himself through new friendships I had made with women who loved the Lord and had a deeper understanding of His heart and really wanted me to see it too. He took all that love that I had that was dirty and broken, and that I had sat down in front of Him and said, I have all of this, and I want to give it to you, but I'm scared. And He took it, and He started just cleaning it off and making it into this new thing, and it didn't turn better. And He taught me about His like compassionate, undying love for me that was unconditional. And that just like doesn't make any sense to me or anybody, but it makes sense to God because that's the way that He loves us.